In this week's Let's Talk Tennis, I'm going to explore how this, I think, has been one of the best weeks of tennis in not just my life, but I think in our family's life in tennis. I think I've been sort of alluding to this in the last few sessions that tennis is changing for myself, but also the family. And there have been some sort of big events that have been happening that are making that happen and feels absolutely amazing. So in this session, I'm going to be talking about how tennis has been changing for my family, how my tennis, thanks to a visiting player from Korea, has really evolved. How now that I feel more comfortable on the forehand, now I'm really starting to work on the backhand, but also in general, this sense of moving in, taking the ball earlier. In addition to that, how I've been learning to relax and be more loose. We all know that being loose is the best thing you can be in tennis, but things have really happened that have brought that to the fore. But also it feels that while things have changed for us as a family and myself, it feels like we're only just getting started, which is an amazing place to be at. Let's take a look. So first off, tennis changing for the family. If we start with my eldest daughter, she has really been working with my wife over the last sort of week and a half now, and they've been going like crazy, working on movement, ready steps, being ready, moving off, moving to the ball, being nice down, wide and low, being set for the shot, but then also recovering well. And it's amazing how, everyone will say tennis is about footwork, tennis is about movement. And it really is. You can have the best forehand and backhand in the world, but if you can't get to the ball, those skills are absolutely useless. But I think it's also been nice to see how my wife is really bringing structure, particularly over the summer holidays, but I think we're going to go beyond that because that is really working. Having this real sort of focus that goes through each session. I think that's amazing both for my eldest daughter, but now we'll do that for my other kids as well. But it's nice to see how my wife is really getting involved. Previously, I've been the one on court, and so it must be frustrating when she's watching and kind of got good inputs, but then it's reliant on me actually doing that on the court. Really pleased that she's there now firsthand working with the kids so that, she gets to feel like, it's not that we're controlling, but we're actively able to, give our thoughts and opinions and help take our children's tennis further on. So that's absolutely amazing. But then what I have been doing, it's sort of freed me up to then focus on our middle daughter, which, she might say that's a good or a bad thing. In particular, she's one of those kids, she's 10, that because when kids are quite little, they get the ball coming and everything's quite high. So you see a lot of kids develop kind of that Western forehand, stand forwards with a Western forehand and try and handle the ball coming high with some spin and sort of finish with that windscreen wiper from the elbow, which, for me, I'm going to go ahead and say, I think that's terrible. It's a response to, when you're small. But also she started commenting that she had a bit of soreness in her upper arm. And you could see that because she's sort of twisting her arm around and then twisting it back over. And so we've kind of gone back and said, right, you've grown a bit now. We've got to get you onto a proper semi-Western forehand using the proper kinetic chain. So I've been working with her, and it illustrates how a lot of tennis learning can be quite organic. Particularly if kids haven't been coached from when they start, or even this could be adults. And, you start developing your own technique in response to what's coming because your brain is trying to just figure it out, which doesn't really lend itself to great tennis technique because, I've always talked about, particularly with my oldest daughter, how nothing is logical in tennis. Everything feels wrong, and everything that feels right to start with tends to be wrong, if that makes sense. But you can also think, I've always sort of also with the kids said, number one, you've got to learn great technique. Not because I want you to look good, but because great technique typically gives you the best chance of playing this sport easily and effortlessly, but it also takes away a lot of the pressure and strain on the body if you're using the entire kinetic chain in the big muscles rather than relying on the little muscles or the little joints like your wrist, for example. So that's been a slightly painful process for her because as soon as you change the grip, then you change the stance, then you've got to change the way you swing the racket, the way you look at the ball, the way you rotate your body, and so on and so forth. But she's getting there, and we're just going to work through it. And I've kind of also said to them, as long as you want to do this and they love playing tennis, then I'm going to insist that you go through this process. And if you go through it once and you kind of make it successful and then you say, I don't want to do that again, then fair dues. But of course, we all know that if you go through that process and it works, they're just going to want to do more, aren't they? And then there's my son who's 8, and I think he's that kid who just all the typical cues seem to work. And he also sort of sees things and he just copies it. And probably being that age, if you can give them good inputs, but also, frankly, at that age, as far as I'm concerned, keep them as far away from competition as possible in terms of serious tournaments where you're putting pressure on them to win or get ranking points. At that age, it is all about, yes, you can sort of do some fun points within the family or do some tie breaks, but you can't insist to them that they must go out there and start winning and taking it seriously. Otherwise, they will develop that, frankly, pretty horrible technique. And so we kept him away from that, and he's just got this gorgeous sort of now semi-open, nice sort of kinetic chain, semi-western forehand with nice topspin on it, starting to look really, really good. So exciting where he's going to go with things. Then we come on to, what I think has been my best week in tennis yet, and I'm playing some of my best tennis, which doesn't necessarily say much, because if you start down here and you get to here and say that's my best, and great is all the way up there, then it's all relative, right? But for me, I feel like I've been playing the best tennis, and that is entirely down to I've taken advantage of this Korean guy who's been visiting, who become sort of friends with. I hit with him 5 times this week for 2 hours each session. Felt like on some of the sessions I was going to literally die because it was so hard, but I just have seen my tennis evolve and develop because, frankly, we're just hitting so many balls. And I've sort of said to him, it's really helped that he's a really good player. He's put me under pressure because you only find out your real sort of mechanics, whether they work or not, when you're under pressure. And he's given me that opportunity and sort of been very good. And I've also felt a responsibility to be good, to give him good hitting sessions. He's not, my coach. And quite a few things have come out of that, which I will talk about. But 2 of the biggest things are, one, it's really got my timing in, my eye. But the second thing is just pure confidence. And it's nice being around someone that you kind of go, you're much better than me, but I feel like I can actually be on court. And, you're coming back to me and saying, can I hit with you? And you sometimes get that confidence to say, I'm actually, I don't even like saying it. You actually feel like you're good, because inherently, and I think I'm the perfect sort of personality for tennis, that I never think I'm good enough. I always think I'm bad, but I always strive to get better. And I think there's that little bit of sort of, I don't really call it optimistic pessimism, where I think I will get better, but not today. It will be tomorrow. And if I keep working hard, it's that sort of, that quite stubborn perfectionist type attitude that, drives me on. So on some of the specific things, it's nice to see my forehand is really holding up. I'm really working on, getting sort of that front hip posted, getting sort of trying to get more into stepping into the ball, but also throwing the hip and then sort of coming round and trying to take it a bit more out in front. But seeing how that would hold up in really sort of hard exchanges, that's been amazing. And there's something happened there, which I'll talk about again on both sides, forehand and backhand, which has come out of that. But then if I talk about the backhand, that's the area that I'm sort of focusing on now, where I've always felt like it works where there's no pressure, but when there is pressure, it's not worked. And, I've gone through all these iterations of trying to think about how to take the racket back, how to have the feed, how to prepare and so on. But it always feels like it's always been about moving backwards, moving back and coming in and taking the ball sort of, almost retreating away. Do you like my sort of dramatic going on the chair there? And actually today, this morning, I suddenly just started going, I've always felt like I'm quite good at taking the ball on the backhand, sort of that bounce hit, take it on the rise. And I started doing that this morning, even on pressure balls. And I felt like I could just step in, get the hips turned, come up on it, throw the racket, come over the ball. And it was like, this is working. And all of a sudden it made me go, hang on a minute. I always seem to be sat back about 2 meters behind the baseline. And for the last hour of us hitting, so the 10th hour of me hitting with them, I just went, I'm going to take everything on the baseline or in. And it was amazing how we just had exactly the same hard exchanges, but I was able to take forehands early, backhands early, and then all the stuff that comes with it, but nothing's new, right? You take the ball earlier, it feels like you can really get over it. So, rather than hitting under and up, you can take time away from your opponent. And it just feels much more natural to get your weight transferring forwards. I mean, it's like, wow, I've just realized something I've been saying probably since the dawn of tennis, but that's been absolutely amazing. I went out with my wife this evening and did that, and I was like, right, I just said, I literally want my toes on the baseline for every single ball. Of course, you do have to move back sometimes, but I said, from now on, my practice is going to be being up on the baseline. But then another thing that happened was, we all know that in tennis, we have to be loose. We have to be relaxed. Even though I must admit, when I grew up playing tennis, some of those cues that coaches have, it was like when I was serving, they said, your arm must be like spaghetti. And I was like, how can your arms be like spaghetti and all floppy? It's like, how would you take the racket up with spaghetti arms? It's like, but of course, there is a little bit of truth in that, but you can't literally be floppy like that. There's got to be some amount of tension in there. But one thing I discovered on Saturday morning, I was doing the warm-up, again, hitting with my Korean friend, and I suddenly went, I said to him when the session started, my intention is to be loose and relaxed. And we were hitting there just from the service line, and I just suddenly went, I've just realized I hold my breath while I'm waiting for the shot to come. And then I don't breathe. I kind of, I'm not breathing, it's mental. The amount of stress I'm putting myself under, the amount of stress I'm putting my muscles under, the amount of tension that must create. So I actually then focused on, and he sort of said, if you watch Rublev warming up, as he hits, he kind of goes, and I started doing that. I started actually saying, when the ball was coming, instead of tensing up, I let myself breathe, and you go, I feel relaxed. And then when I go forward to the ball, instead of, it's like, letting all that tension out. And all of a sudden, I sort of, found myself starting to go, I need to relax. This is, again, nothing new, but how, the sort of the terrible thing with this for anybody is saying, you must be relaxed in a sport which makes you incredibly tense and stressed, and you're moving fast and you're trying to make things work, and yet you've got to be relaxed. Amazing skill to learn. So there's, again, something more that I'm going to be taking on and saying there are tactics I can use for this, including, or I suppose strategies, how I breathe, for example. And I think I'm just really excited to see where this takes my tennis. So once again, I love doing these little episodes because I just get to talk and rabbit on. In wrap up, it feels like things have changed. We're entering this new era in all of our tennis. I haven't mentioned my wife, but still, I think, well, I have, her being involved in the kids' tennis, but also it's brilliant to see her hitting with my eldest daughter now. That I think, for her, it's almost like she's getting to play a relatively decent standard of tennis, and that will help her tennis, and seeing the two of them having exchanges is awesome. Anyway, it feels like for all of us, we're entering a new era, but at the same time, it feels like we're only just getting started. It feels like we're starting to reach this sort of baseline where you can say, maybe to use sort of the house analogy, we've poured the foundations. We can start building from here. Really looking forward to that. And it has kind of left me in a sort of a what happens next moment, because we're getting to the end of the summer holidays. The kids will go back into the next year of school. We've got to start thinking about planning for that. But even for me, it makes me think about, how do I approach my hitting, my training, my tournaments? I think I'm going to do all of that very differently because, it's had my eyes open having a visiting player who's training seriously at a university, who plays 5 hours a day, has played on the ITF tour, and you suddenly get to see that's kind of given me so many things and ideas of how I can work. And then I look forward to how that trickles down through the family and seeing how we all evolve there. So if you got to this point, well done. Would love to get your thoughts and opinions in terms of, has anything changed in your tennis recently? Have you reached a moment, maybe with a particular shot? Maybe there's been sort of this thing that you've always heard of, this topic like being loose, but you've suddenly realized a way to do that. Are there things that basically have changed your tennis and your view on tennis forever, perhaps? Love to get your thoughts and opinions, as always. So please do share by putting them in the comments.